so much. Dear God, we ask that we might be taught, all of us, our hearts opened, enabled, lightened, and enlightened. Amen. I want to begin with one of my favorite parables. It's from Rabbi Lawrence Kushner. It's kind of a poem. Each lifetime is the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. For some, there are more pieces. For others, the puzzle is more difficult to assemble. Some seem to be born with a nearly completed puzzle, and so it goes. Souls going this way and that, trying to assemble the myriad parts. But know this, you do not have within yourself all the puzzle pieces, all the pieces to your puzzle. Like before the days when they used to seal jigsaw puzzles in cellophane, ensuring that all the pieces were there. Everyone carries with them at least one and probably many pieces to someone else's puzzle. Sometimes they know it, sometimes they don't. And when you present your piece, which is worthless to you, to another, whether you know it or not, whether they know it or not, you are a messenger from the Most High. What do you make of that? I met Rabbi Kushner a dozen years ago in a forum at Trinity Episcopal in Northwest, where, among other things, he spoke about this poem, this parable. He ventured to say to us that he believed that most people are missing an average of 7 pieces to their own puzzle. That's when they're born. He also said that he believed that those pieces we give away and receive do not necessarily go to or come from people we'd even want to associate with. Now, sure, our spouses, our partners have a piece of our puzzle, as we have a piece of theirs. But sometimes, for our own puzzle to be complete, we need contact with some people and ideas we may initially find somewhat foreign. They may come just out of the blue. There's a tiny episode in the book of Genesis that is Exhibit A for this truth. It's connected with the Bible patriarch Joseph, who you may remember is sold into slavery by his brothers who are jealous of him because his father gave him that fancy coat. So Joseph is sent on an errand by his father to locate his brothers and make sure they're okay. And he can't find them. And so he's about to go back home where a nameless man just happens along by chance, speaking of puzzle pieces, and tells him that he overheard his brothers say that they were on their way to a place called Dothan. Dothan. That's it. But it makes all the difference in the world. Because Joseph goes to Dothan, and the narrative arc of his being betrayed by his brothers begins there. Without the nameless man there on the road, there would be no Joseph's story. Joseph would not be sold into slavery in Egypt. He would not have ended up in prison there. He would not have come to the attention of the Pharaoh of the time. He would not have risen to a position of authority there where he could save his people and the Egyptians from starvation during the famine he saw coming. Without that unnamed man telling Joseph his brothers were over in Dothan, there would not have been any Jews left in Egypt in the end of the Genesis narrative. And because of that, there would have been no Exodus, so no Moses, no Israel, no King David, no Jerusalem, no Jesus, no Protestant Reformation, no Southminster Presbyterian Church. All because of one nameless man who said, I think I heard them say they went over to Dothan. Human lives, human history turns on such matters. So think about it for a minute. So many of the people who make the most profound difference to us in our lives walk on the stage of our life for a moment, or an hour, or a bus ride, right? And then they walk off a minute later. Then days, weeks, months, years, maybe decades later, we look back realizing how important a part they played in our lives when we remark, I don't even remember her name. Remember Joseph Campbell, who said, "Follow your bliss." It was on bumper stickers forever. Now listen, here's the rest of what he said. He said, "Follow your bliss, and doors will open for you where you didn't know there would be doors." That's the kicker. That's how this works. Jane Goodall, in her wonderful memoir, Reason for Hope, tells how she received one indispensable puzzle piece at a young age. She says that she had two irrepressible ideas in her head as a child: animals and Africa. Coming as she did, though, from a very poor family, how could she realize any dreams, she wondered? There was no way she could afford college. So instead, she went to secretarial school. One day in her early 20s, she received a note from a long-lost friend now living in Kenya. "Would you like to come for a visit?" Of course. And while there, she heard about the work of a paleontologist named Louis Leakey. And at the time, he was 54, and he was full of something we'd call the mentoring instinct. He was looking for a protege, but he didn't want some graduate student. He wanted someone he could train from scratch. Jane was perfect. He and his wife took Jane under their wing, and with infinite patience enabled her to become the Jane Goodall we all know and admire today, the woman who lived among the chimpanzees, right? Leakey did not make her over in his image. He just made it possible for her to become all she was meant to be. And it wasn't just Leakey that's the puzzle piece giver. It was that friend who just said, "I'd like to come to Kenya. I've got this spare bed in the back of my house." So that's what I want to discuss today, this mentoring instinct. The mentoring instinct is really strong in us. There comes a time in most lives when we're immensely ready to be mentored, and there comes a time when we're immensely ready to mentor. How wonderful when, by the grace of God, mentor and mentee, right, find one another. So who mentored you? Was it someone you might have expected it to be? I mean, teachers are often cited, right? Teachers who offered more than information, who shared pieces of their lives, teachers who saw things in their students that the students didn't see in themselves at all. This morning's Old Testament text about Elijah and Elisha is, of course, rich with metaphors about that kind of relationship. Elijah has come to the end of his life and work. He's a grand old man of prophecy. He and his protege Elisha walk together toward the Jordan River. And the details are important here. Elijah takes off his cloak, this long flowing overcoat called a mantle. Takes it off. It's the symbol of his authority. He rolls it up, strikes the water. Water parts. The two of them cross the other side on dry ground. We know what that's about. Then there comes Elijah's ascension, preceded by the arrival of a fiery chariot, which is just crazy. It's also dramatic and full of ancient images intended to evoke a sense of mysterious otherworldliness. On the one hand, the story seems as far away from us as the moon, and yet in another way, the realities revealed in the story mirror the lives that you and I live today. Because some essential things never change. The passing of the mantle from Elijah to Elijah was replicated in our midst, in fact, a month ago when new elders and deacons, you know who you are, came forward and hands were placed upon you, symbolizing the sacredness of the transfer of leadership in our faith tradition, which is being entrusted, to this new cohort and sometimes a new generation. Many years ago, hands were laid on me by a number of ministers that I alluded to that time. A number of ministers were there for that, and most, if not all of them, are no longer living. And so I'm wearing the stole that I told you I was given on that day. I wear one every Sunday as a sign of, my ordained office. And the stole represents, in fact, what Jesus referred to in Matthew's gospel when he said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." But I'd like to think it also has something to do with Elijah's mantle and the passing from one generation to another of certain callings. Elisha says, "As the Lord lives and as you live, I'm not going to leave you, Elijah. I'm with you all the way." There's no more beautiful human posture than that kind of loyalty. But as I'm trying to say, there is more to the relationship between this mentor and mentee than loyalty. I don't know why Elijah keeps saying to the younger one, "Don't go any farther with me." No, but after a while, he realizes there's more at stake than loyalty. So he desists, and they move together forward. And it's then that Elisha asks for a double share of Elijah's spirit, which is where the mentoring moment happens. Because in ancient times, there were occasions where the oldest son would inherit twice as much as the younger sons in the family, the daughters receiving nothing. The point here is that Elisha is not asking for material prosperity or money. He wants the ability to serve God. Above all, he wants to not fail. And he's terrified because there are such huge shoes to be filled. We all know that kind of fear, worrying whether we're going to measure up, right? But as it has long been said, better to take a job that calls you to up your game a little than to take a job that you do so well that you end up coasting and getting bored really quickly. So how is your life stacked up when it comes to this kind of measuring rod? And it's important for me to say that mentoring is way more than teaching. I don't want to run down teaching. But it involves a sizable investment in an individual, and maybe the best teaching is about that too. There's a sense here of looking after a person as Louis Leakey and his wife together looked after Jane Goodall. It's about investing some of yourself in someone you deem worth the time and the effort. Again, it's about the willingness to give something more than information. It's about giving something of your soul, right? Maybe exposing some of your soul to them. You do this by giving them entree, by making yourself vulnerable, right? You leave yourself open, and in the process, you're opening yourself to a kind of evaluation. The mentor, goes through this. You can't help but ask yourself, is what I have to offer to the next generation up to speed, or is it hopelessly outdated? That's a significant part of this. Mentoring tests what you've learned in your bones. It's a measure of what one has accomplished, not in terms of product, but in terms of the honest outlay of something deep. I was so pleased to hear that the Portland Trailblazers draft pick Shaden Sharp said he's looking forward to learning a ton about being an NBA guard from Damian Lillard. That's what being a successful rookie is all about, and maybe it will stir something vital and purpose-giving in Damian Lillard, too, that will keep him around a while. I mean, the mentee can give as much to the mentor, if not more, right? I remember how my most important mentor arrived in my life as a total gift. When I came out of seminary and began working at a church in Northeast Portland, I felt like Elisha, very green. I ran out of preaching materials the fourth Sunday. Really, I did. Nothing left to say. Done. And I knew it. But help was on its way. A neighboring pastor called me out of the blue. He was in his early 50s, which seemed just really old to me. And he expressed an interest in getting acquainted and told me he'd pick me up for breakfast the following Thursday morning. He didn't ask me, he just said, I'm picking you up for breakfast. I confessed to him to being awfully green, and he helped me deal with several major problems in my first church over a number of years. Things I would have sunk me had he not been around there. After a few months, I met his wife and told her how important our weekly breakfasts were to me, and then she told me how important I was to her husband, who'd done mission work in Ethiopia for most of his career and as a result had been out of the country for 25 years and knew nothing, she said, of popular culture or little of what had happened, in fact, in the United States for a quarter century, and it was showing in his preaching, she said. God or fate or serendipity put us needy ones together in an Elijah-Elisha kind of relationship. Remember those puzzle pieces? As the whirlwind carries Elijah into heaven, Elisha grasps his own outer garment and he tears it in two as a sign of grief. But then he picks up the mantle of his beloved mentor, tries it on, and so first there's his grief, and then there comes the embracing of the new future in the wake of that loss. I remember a tender moment a few days after my dad died. There was, among other things, my father's clothes to sort through. Most went to the Goodwill, but I asked my mother if I could have his one Pendleton shirt. Not because it was his best shirt, it wasn't. It had a couple of moth holes in it, in fact, and it didn't fit me. But I could see a number of his hairs in it. And I held it to my face, and it smelled like my dad. And I've kept it with my own shirts ever since. And for me, it's something like a mantle, and I bet you have something like that too. So here's one of the glories of human existence, that each one of us is unique. There's no one who's been like us or ever will be like us. There's something we are put on this earth to do that only we can do, no matter how small, even a little box, right? With something in it for a child. We are all part of a larger story. A continuum of hope and faith, a continuum that begins before we're born and will exist once we're gone. The Sunday I was ordained in November of 1980, I asked an early mentor of mine, the Reverend Douglas Hunneke, who was campus chaplain at the U of O, to give me my charge as a pastor. Now, Doug had brought the author Elie Wiesel to Oregon a number of times, and I'd been deeply impressed with Wiesel's amazing heart and ethical imperatives, always spoken in the shadow of the Holocaust, him being a survivor. In his memoir called Night, he says, to forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. Well, as part of my charge, Reverend Hunneke looked me straight in the eye that day, and he said the following. He said, Scott, never say or do anything that does dishonor to the millions of children murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust. You know, when the Roe decision was overturned on Friday, thousands of so-called pro-lifers took to the streets to celebrate. Many of them had long seen abortion as a modern version of the Holocaust. Many of them felt and feel that justice had finally been served. It's important for us to remember that. But let me add to this that the ball is now in their court. And a good number of them know this. Some of them know that they are on notice to finally demonstrate that they care about born children, not just the unborn. And having been a pastor in Utah for 10 of the last 11 years, I know a lot of these people. They know that how they choose to deal with questions like health care for women and children will be under brand new scrutiny. How they address funding education for poor children and the question of affordable child care and school lunch programs, right? And a host of other concerns is now thrown under new light. And in this initial moment, we need to hold these women and children up, not let them be invisible, and not flag in holding them up. And of course, we also need to get out and vote, and get the vote out in November. One more thing. Let me ask you, if you're concerned about the welfare of women and children in this country now that the right to health care for women is so tragically compromised, who've been your mentors and guides in giving you the conscience that you carry that gets you up in the morning, that makes you do the things you do? Take a moment and think about that as we begin to try to find our footing in only this second day of the post-Roe world. And finally, remember, each lifetime is like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. For some, there are more pieces. For others, the puzzle is more difficult to assemble. Some seem to be born with a nearly completed puzzle, and so it goes. But know this: you do not have within yourself all the pieces to your own puzzle. Everyone carries with them at least one and probably many pieces to someone else's. And sometimes they know it, and sometimes they don't. And when you present your piece, which is worthless to you, to another, whether you know it or not, whether they know it or not, you are a messenger from the Most High. Amen. One.